17 of Exodus is building on, each week I come away with stuff that, I think is really interesting and helpful and applicable to my life, and I don't want to forget it. So one of the goals is throughout the week, we meditate on what we learned, and then we look forward to what we're going to learn. Is there anything from last week, chapter 16, that you want to remember or you have a testimony about? Other than Krispy Kreme donuts. Such a memorable thing. It's a powerful tool, Krispy Kreme, sugar. What else? As you remember last week, what are some things that stuck out to you from chapter 16? What, as you recall? I know this is like... They didn't believe Moses.
A lot of
Complaining.
Yes. Like children, it's like they constantly having to be gratified.
They didn't believe God either.
They didn't believe God. It's true.
Some of the people took extra.
It's interesting to me that the thing that sticks out to me the most is he tells them, don't try to keep this to the next day. And what do? A bunch of them try to keep it to the next day. And then they try to look for it on the Sabbath day, and they can't find it on the Sabbath. Like, they think that all these things have happened. Exactly. Why would they think? It's just an interesting way that we approach these things.
Saying all that, it's interesting with what's happening currently on our campuses.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too far into it, but isn't it interesting? If you don't do this, we're going to do that, but then they never get the consequences. And isn't that how a lot of people are raising their children today? There are no consequences for what you say. Or you say, I'm going to take that away if you don't, and they never do.
Yeah.
Meaning it's called following.
Well, I think that
they didn't believe because
absolutely. And one of the things we see in the Old Testament, and there was the sin of what's that? There's this cycle where they did something, and then it would lead them into sin, and then they would have calamity, and they would repent and ask God to heal them. Then he would heal them, and they go right back into, do you know what that thing that they were doing was? They did what was right in their own eyes, right? That phrase you're going to hear all through the Old Testament is that the Hebrews did what was right in their own eyes. That is a good phrase for the modern person. We've moved away from an absolute truth outside of us. Now all absolutes comes from inside of us. And so we do what's right in our own eyes. And that has become, because the schools have leaned into that, that's become the basis of our communities is, the worst sin you can commit is to question someone's own view of the world, because if what was doing is right in your own eyes, then we're all our own gods and we're all in control of our own destinies. And who is anyone else to question someone else's thoughts or views or perspectives? So this is huge. It's still applicable to us today. And remember, they weren't, first of all, there were Egyptians that came with them. And, they had been slaves, and how much training? They didn't have a Sabbath. They didn't have a day of training.
And
so
there were 2 million of them.
2 million.
So that's 2 million personalities.
That's true. Yep. And God says, I didn't pick them because they were the best and the brightest, or
I'm sure there were a lot of GGs and G.
Yes.
How did Moses or Aaron communicate to 2 million people?
So that's where we talked about last week too. The loudest voices made their way closest to Moses and Aaron. So really, maybe they all weren't complaining, but the loudest voices were complaining, right? The ones that made their way to the front of the line to make sure that their opinions were being heard.
After, if you hear somebody says something, 2 million people times it to the end.
Yeah.
You don't imagine what.
So, but even in psychology today, in any organization, whether it's a church or a business, any group of people, if it's, a football team, if it's a sports team, whatever it is, there's about a 10% that are on one end, 10% on the other end. So 10% may be all in and for it, 10% that are all against it. And then everyone is in the middle, kind of follows the voices on those things. It's usually not the majority. It's just, like even in our country, it's the loudest voices that are heard, and they tend to be either on one side of the spectrum or the other, and everyone else is in the middle, and then they kind of fluctuate back and forth where they go. It's the same thing here, same thing going on here. All right, so what does God want us to know about his commitment to us is one of the things we're going to look at as we study this together. And Chuck, if you would read verses 1-4 for us of chapter 17.
Then all the congregation of the children of Israel set out on their journey from the wilderness of sin, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped in Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. Therefore the people contended with Moses and said, "Give us water that we may drink." So Moses said to them, "Why do you contend with me? Why do you tempt the Lord?" And the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, "Why is it you have brought us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, "What shall I do with this people? They're almost ready to stone me."
All right, so what stuck out to you about that?
They were thirsty. 2 million thirsty people. And complaining.
Complaining. So what's the opposite of complaining?
Thank you for letting us be thirsty.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
I gotta kind of walk in there saying.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
We're following this guy. We've wandered into the wilderness. We're hungry. We're thirsty, and nothing's being done.
Yeah. Patience, right? They didn't have a lot of it.
No, they were thirsty.
I know. But but what do they say? Did we come out here to die? Yeah. So I hear you, but here's the thing. If you take a step back and you think, well, Moses shows up, they have the 10 plagues, then we go through a wall of water with the Red Sea, and he destroys all of our enemies behind us. Yes, he probably brought us out here just to kill us. The problem is that, so here's what I think. You're right. At some level,
I don't think they meant any ill will.
No.
I think they were thirsty.
What's the commercial now? What's the commercial? You've seen it for Snickers bars. You're not yourself.
Oh, yes, and
Right. So they used to have like a celebrity that was like a diva or someone that was really hard to get along with, and you're just not yourself when you're hungry, right? So when you're thirsty, you stop thinking logically. You think, I'm thirsty, and I'm made up of like 80% water, and I need some water to survive, right? But because instead of saying here's the progression that should happen and doesn't happen, and I think we're going to see it hopefully over time, they should have said, look, we know God can take care of us. We need it now. Instead of saying that, they say, what do you do? Bring us out here to kill us? Like, it's way better back in Egypt. Like, yeah, okay, we get it. You need some water right now. So what I tell my daughter Anastasia all the time, I say, honey is much more attractive than vinegar, right? Like, if you want to get something, it's way better to be kind and polite and respectful. Like, where's my stuff? Why didn't I get what I want? Like, that approach doesn't work with anyone, right? That's the last approach that would work anywhere with any person is, you're not giving me what I want right now. So there's a lesson to be learned here, right? Somewhat of a lesson. I agree with you. If there was no water, I mean, you get pretty desperate.
There's not 10.
Yeah, you get desperate. You get desperate.
All 2 million of us are thirsty.
Absolutely. So the problem is they need something to drink. Who do they blame?
The guy that dragged them into the wilderness.
And what is he worried they're going to do to him?
Stone.
Oh, wow.
Now, that's where they kind of screwed up.
Yeah.
Someone that's connected.
Yes.
It's gonna be like,
Okay,
this is
so
what I can do.
you're right. Their approach is first they're like complaining, and then they're like, well, let's kill the one guy that might actually be able to help us. This is, don't kill the messenger. Like, don't shoot the messenger. Don't stone the messenger. And this kind of stoning is not the modern, this is like actual rocks, like they're trying to kill you with a stone.
And like I said, these aren't 2 million healthy people. These are 2 million old people, kids.
Well, yeah, it's diversified.
Regular folks, people with bad backs, holy moly.
So verse 4, what does it say? What does verse 4 say?
So Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, what shall I do with this people? They're almost ready to stone me.
Yes. So he has probably the right response, right? God, I have no clue what your answer to this problem of no water is, and it's getting pretty rough. This would be a good time for you to show up and take care of this problem, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we see that pretty clearly. Anything else there in those first 4 verses? What is the theme? What is the common? What keeps happening? So he delivers them, and then the next time, then there is a challenge, right? So in our lives, we have to expect the challenges. You don't get past the Red Sea, and then there's no more challenges. You don't get saved, and then there's no more challenge. Actually, it's the opposite. Now you have at least in Egypt, we had water and we had food, even though it wasn't a lot and it wasn't great, but we could survive. Now we don't see how we're going to survive, and we're all starting to get hungry and thirsty, and we don't see an answer to this problem. And the only answer we see is what? Death, right? And this is stirring. He's worried this is going to turn into a riot, and this is going to get out of control.
I had a pastor tell me because I said to him, I was caregiver to my folks, and I said, I leave here praying for patients, and by Sunday I'm back here praying again.
Yeah.
Run out. And he said, I'd suggest you stop praying for patients because he is testing you to show you how you need the patients. So I said, your point is taken.
Well,
So this is the same thing. They may want to believe, but it's very hard when they're thirsty.
So when I was growing up, we lived by a pig farm, which was disgusting because they had a cornfield and they would, spray the cornfield, and that was hard to take. But past the the pig farm was a horse farm. And what kind of horse would you rather have? One that was energetic and passionate and powerful, but needed to be broken, or a lazy horse that didn't do anything, but was well behaved? Which one are you gonna? Which is the preferable horse?
Neither.
You say neither. See, there's something to be said that the Egyptians have the Hebrews have a passion. It needs to be focused, and the leader has to be willing to absorb. So what I was told is when you become a pastor, you learn to absorb pain. Like part of being a leader is absorbing the pain so that you can move forward in a healthy way. And there's always going to be obstacles. There's always going to be challenges, and people may want to stone and kill you for something they think you have control over when you really don't have control over it, right? So, but the challenge for all of us is, am I progressing? Am I moving forward? Am I learning these things? Am I willing to absorb pain for the betterment of someone else? Parenting is absorbing pain and dysfunction, and a child who cannot speak, cannot feed, cannot take care of themselves, you're absorbing that. You're taking that on as your responsibility until they mature to the point. The goal is not to keep them there. It's to move them to a place where they no longer act that way, right? And so here, the whole point is living by faith. He's giving them a test of, are you going to trust me when you are thirsty and hungry and you don't see an answer that you can provide for yourself? And you look at Moses and say, you don't see an answer that he can provide for you. Their whole life, it's been slave master, tell us what to do, provide us with what we have. Their whole life has always been a very clear, it's like when you're a kid and you just, okay, I'm going to the next grade. And then you get to the end of high school and you're like, well, now what? Some go to college and you go through that. But that moment when you no longer have another grade to go to, and you're like, well, what's going to happen next? Because there's nobody there supplying a clear thing for you. You have to start living out your life. And that's faith. They had to live by faith. And here they're being tested in their faith. And we're seeing they're at the front end of faith. Not there. There's a lot of room of growth, right? Now, do you think God would let them starve and died but from not having water?
No.
No.
No, 'cause he gave him land.
Yes.
He already showed it.
Yes. So he's gonna do it. The problem is we want him to, like, our timing is tough. It's tough. It's very tough. And I agree. Like, if we were there, I would be the first one, like, Moses, what's the deal? We're here. Why? What's going on? You haven't thought this out very well, have you? Like, it seems like he's a poor planner, right? But the truth is, it's not his plan. It's God's plan. All right. Anything else from those first 4 verses? There's a lot there. All right, Jesse, if you would read 5 through 7.
The Lord answered Moses, "Go on ahead of the people and take some of the elders of Israel with you. Take the staff you struck the Nile with in your hand and go. I am going to stand there in front of you on the rock at Horeb, and when you hit the rock, water will come out of it, and the people will drink." Moses did this in the sight of the elders of Israel. He named the place Massah and Meribah because the Israelites complained and because they tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?"
Is the Lord among us or not? All right, so what happens and what stuck out to you? What happened? So I think we get to, another problem is maybe we have the flannel graph Sunday school picture of what this looked like. I mean, it could have been an underground, reservoir of flowing water out into a pool that was gigantic, and it was fresh, clean water that they could all come and get, right? It could have been a huge pool, 3-4 feet deep. Anyone who needed water could fill whatever they had to fill water with. Like, it wasn't just like a trickle of water coming out the side of a rock, there's a little bit of, get everyone come up and put your mouth on the rock and get some water. Okay, so it's not even really about the historical account, right? Because yes, this is historical, and yes, that's part of it, but that's not really what God wants us to get out of this. Is this historical account? What is this all about?
It seems he took elders with him, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
It's almost like he's going to start you're the sergeant, you're the lieutenant, he's got people that are watching what's going on now, and they're going to be part of their little.
So why would God have him take elders with him? What would be the point of that?
So the elders can share with others what happened.
Yeah, and so they can stop looking just at Moses and saying, "You're our only hope." Like, this isn't just the Moses show. He's not the only one. He's part of God's. God is the one we're really following. Remember, later they say, "Why can't we have a king like everybody else?" And he says, "I've always been your king. I'm just not in the physical sense on the earth as a person your king right now." Okay, so he says, "Okay, I'll deal with their problem. I've heard they're complaining. Go ahead with these elders and do what?"
Struck a lot.
The staff, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And what was the staff used for? What was it used for outside of this? What was the main use of a staff? It was to correct sheep. Protect and correct the sheep, right? Like, it's actual symbol of correction and direction and provision. So he takes the staff. Would anyone ever in the million years think, go hit a rock and water's going to come out? So why that? And why would God want to do a miracle like that? Yeah, okay. So who gets the credit? Does Moses get the credit because he found that he knows those rocks that have water in them? He is a genius when it comes to getting water rocks. No, who gets the credit? He's training the people, like, look, I will take care of you, and I can take care of you in ways that no one else can, and you can only see that I did it for you. And how many of those things have already happened? 10 plagues, parting of the Red Sea, like leading in a pillar of fire, like manna from heaven, right? So now it's amazing. Like he keeps coming back to that. All right. So who gets the credit? God gets the credit, right? All right. Now I want to share with you really quickly a verse from 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 and 3. For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers and sisters. Oh, before I read this, I want to say this, and this is so helpful for me, and hopefully it'll be helpful for you. The Old Testament is the mystery concealed. The New Testament is the mystery revealed. If you want to unlock the understanding of the mystery in the Old Testament, you need to look a lot of times into the New Testament to see where the code of unlocking it is. If you're a rabbi or if you're a Jewish person, you really are going to have to do some mental gymnastics with manna and especially this story. Because logically, rocks don't produce water. Hitting rocks, I don't think I've ever seen someone hit a rock other than maybe the rock split or the rock was moved and it opened something behind it. But hitting a rock tends to not produce water. Okay, so this is not a logical thing to happen. So what's the mystery is, why did God choose a rock? Why did he have Moses hit the rock? And why did water come out of the rock? So then if the answer is in the New Testament, here's where we can find it. 1 Corinthians 10, 1 and 3. For I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were under the cloud and that they all passed through the sea. They were all baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. They ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that is accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. So Paul writes to the Corinthian church to help them to understand, when you read when you study the Torah about this Exodus account of Moses, recognize the main reason this is happening is that there is a spiritual truth that we need to understand. And what's the spiritual truth? Christ is the rock, right? And what did Jesus say? I will produce living water, right? And he who drinks of me will never thirst again. And then I am the rock. Remember the whole analogy. Build your house on the rock, where the storm will come and the wind will blow, but it will not be moved, right? That idea of a rock was a symbol. Now you can look back and say, why did Moses take the staff, the shepherd's staff, and hit a rock and it produced water? Because all of that was to help, for thousands of years, people could look and say, wow, God's plan is eternal. God's plan is bigger than any one moment. And he was revealing his eternal plan in a specific way with a specific act of Christ, the rock, producing living water. Interestingly enough, we're going to get to it a little bit later. What happens is the people want water again. And you know what Moses does? Yeah, he hits it twice. Do you realize, and I'm sure you guys know this, the reason why Moses was not able to go into the promised land? Because he hit the rock twice. They were in the wilderness 40 years because they didn't believe Joshua's account that we could take over Jericho. And so then God says, well, if you don't trust me, then you can wander. And he said, I'm not going to let any of these people live except, yes. But here's the thing. Okay, so he hit the rock twice. What's the big deal?
He was supposed to speak to it. He disobeyed God.
Okay, but even that, why did God take that so seriously? Yeah. But let's take it. Let's take this mystery revealed part of it and apply it. How many times did Jesus have to go to the cross? You can't go back and put him back on the cross. You speak to the rock. You don't hit the rock. Because when you speak to the rock, he hears you. And he'll deliver the water that you need if you speak to him. You no longer need to hit him with the rod of judgment. He's already been hit. The rock was hit. Moses was not allowed to go into the promised land because he hit the rock twice. He tried to go back and do the act. And there is a symbol there for all of us that Christ died once. He doesn't die every time we take communion. He doesn't die, he doesn't die. Like, I don't need him to keep dying for my sins. He already died for my sins. And he didn't pay for 98% of my sins. He didn't pay for 95. He paid for 100%. So when I go back to him and I keep saying, well, I just feel guilty or I feel this, I'm hitting the rock again. Right? He's saying, don't hit the rock again. Talk to the rock. Say, hey, I recognize I sinned, but you don't put him back on the cross. He's already paid in full the entirety of it. This is such a powerful, I think this is something even today would be a great thing for all churches to focus in on, that you're saved through the cross and the resurrection, and you can't keep going back and saying, well, I need to be more saved. That's what Moses did. He went and put the rod of judgment onto the rock, hoping that that would produce living water again. And it cannot. And it was such a bad thing that he did, that God said, you are not going to the promised land because you did that. You will not, that was the thing.
And Moses, if he trusted enough and honored him as holy in the sight of the Israelites.
Yeah. But all of that was symbols, all of it from the beginning. It was so that the church could say, wow, we have an eternal God, a God that is beyond time, beyond all these things, and he's revealing things to us, even back in all these things that didn't make sense to us about Moses, he is aligning up so that they can make sense to us today. So it's an interesting truth. This whole rock getting hit and turning into water makes no sense if there's no meaning in Christ, living water. He's the rock. And the rod of judgment and the rod of correction was placed against the rock to produce the water, the living water. It had to be broken in a sense. It had to be pierced for the water to be presented. This is why, even though we can try to grasp the actual logistics of it, I don't think that that's all that important. I think recognizing Christ is saying to me, he's already paid for my sin. Stop trying to hit the rock. Right? Today, I need to live in that freedom. I need to live in the confidence that my sin has been dealt with. I have the living water. My body will resurrect and I will live eternally. And I don't need to keep hitting the rock for that to happen. It's happened. He did it once and for all. So important truths, I believe, for us to consider and focus in on. All right. So he hits the rock and he names the place, right?
Yeah. What is that?
Two things he names it.
Massa and Meribah.
Yeah, Hebrew. And what do those places mean? Yes. They quarreled. Yes. They were tested and they quarreled. So he names the actual place. You guys did not trust the Lord and you quarreled and you got mad at me, and I'm going to name this place that. So every time we go by here, I'm going to remember that you doubted God. Because the truth is, like, they needed a marker to remind them in the future when something didn't seem like it was going to work out, they could trust God. And sometimes, we've got to go back in our own spirit and remember, God was faithful to forgive me of that. He's going to forgive me of this. Or he got me through that and he'll get me through this. Like, there's a place, there are journeys in our lives that need to be labeled, and there needs to be almost like a flag that reminds us, oh yeah, God is faithful. God is forgiving. He's loving. He's patient. And so it's actually more the bad stuff in our life that directs us in the right direction, because in those moments, he had to do the thing for us, right? He had to give them water, and he had to show up because they couldn't do anything for themselves. So but he does name it, a negative area, right? This is not something, it wasn't a positive, we got water here, or God supplied through the rock. It was through our quarreling and complaining. Even though, and what is the beauty in that? The beauty is he is a patient, loving God. Even when we quarrel, even when we question, even when we don't have faith and we don't trust and we don't believe, and we live completely by the flesh, that the flesh leads, like we're willing to do whatever the flesh tells us to do, he's still faithful in his part of it. Yeah, there's a sense of humor. Yes. All right. Anything else stick out to you? Interestingly enough, that Moses is told to, remember, go ahead, lead the way, and that there's a calling out to lead, a calling out to follow where God is leading. Sometimes you have to follow him. He's going to lead you sometimes just out away and make you commit to following wherever he leads you. That's why we say, when you come to the Lord, it's wherever, whenever, however I'm available. You can't really put restrictions on it because he may call you to take a staff and hit a rock in one way or another. And if you don't do that, then they die, right? The thing that you were supposed to do doesn't happen when we don't follow God's direction in our life. All right, Bonnie, if you would read 8 through 13.
Now Amalek came and fought with Israel and wrecked them. And Moses said to Joshua, choose us some men and go out, fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the rod of God in my hand. So Joshua did as Moses said to him and fought with Amalek. And Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. And so it was, when Moses held up his hand, that Israel prevailed. When he let down his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands became heavy. So they took a stone and they put it under him, and he sat on it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun.
All right.
Oh, 13. So Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword.
All right, just a side note, that's the first time we hear of Joshua. That's the first naming of Joshua. So if you want to know where Joshua, if there's ever a trivia question, you could say Exodus chapter 17 is where he first came into the picture. All right, what stuck out to you? Interesting story. Another interesting story, huh?
Like if his hand came down and they lost, and his hand was up. I mean, it's like they've been doing this all day.
Okay,
So they held it up there.
they did.
So why is Amalek fighting?
All right, so we're going to get into that a little bit.
They made the
There's a lot. I mean, this is like we could go down a lot of different paths because this actually has a lot of impacts throughout all of Scripture. One of the things that, okay, I'm going to read this because this is, remember, the Old Testament, New Testament. Actually, the Old Testament also helps to understand the Old Testament because there's other events that occur, right? So 1 Samuel 15, 1-3. Samuel said to Saul was the king, I am the one the Lord has anointed you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go and attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys.
This is where they didn't do that and he got in trouble.
This is a really interesting story because we could read the whole chapter, and there's actually a few chapters, and this goes on and on. Saul thinks he does an amazing thing because he goes and he defeats the Amalekites, but he keeps like the donkeys and he keeps some of the things, right? And Samuel says, you are a fool. You disobeyed God. And it actually says, this is the first part where it switches. So up to this point, Saul is seen as a pretty good king. And then it says, God is remorseful for making you king. And so because Saul did not follow the directions completely, and it tells us why. Do you know why Saul did what he did?
I thought he was rewarding his men to be able to get trophies and stuff.
No, he was being pragmatic. He said, look, I can give this offering as an offering to the Lord. So in his mind, he thought, look, I'm going above and beyond. Not only did I destroy them all, now I'm bringing some plunder back to give as an offering to the Lord. And Samuel's like, you are a fool. And from this point on, this group of so the reason that this is a problem, and it kind of alludes to it here, when they come out of Egypt, when they just get through the Red Sea, they were waiting behind them and they attacked. And they waited till they were weak and vulnerable. And, and God was very upset that this was their approach. Now, interestingly, if you study this, the rabbis will teach that this is the symbol of the atheist, that the atheist waits for the believer child and attacks at the vulnerable spots and tries to deceive them into deception, into following their way. And God hates that more than anything. That's why Jesus said it's better for a millstone to be hung around your neck and thrown into the river than for you to deceive a young person or to misguide. And this is the idea of vulnerability, that this army they heard what was going on. They organized an attack, and they attacked when they thought the Israelites were the most weak. Yeah. Yet you have this battle, which is unique, because when Moses' arm is up with the staff, they're winning. When it goes down, they're losing. And he's an old guy. He's over 80 years old. His shoulders are burning. I mean, he can't just.
He's not thirsty.
But he's not thirsty. He's thirsty for a win. But what happens? What happens? It's a cool story. His other leaders hold his arms up, right? They hold it up. Why? Because he can't do it by himself. And first of all, is he doing anything?
No.
This is all God teaching all of us. I can do things that you can't do through you, but it's not just you. I can use your life in a powerful way to impact and help others, but it's not about you. And if you start owning it as somehow I'm the one doing this, when your arm comes down, I'll show you it's not you. Right? When you start thinking, well, I'm somebody, look at me. I got all this. Look at all these wonderful things I've done. Your arm's going to come down and you're like, oh, I didn't do it at all. I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. And all these things align perfectly, like as if God was in charge of it all. Right? And really what it teaches us is humility. God's in control. He's the one doing the good. And at times we're going to need people to come along, and we got to be willing to let people help us lift up the arm so that the victory can happen.
I'm surprised no one ever tried to steal the rod.
So, yeah, no, it's a powerful rod.
I'm serious. I mean, because I could see
Okay.
some of them thinking that's where the power's coming
So
from.
when we get to Malachi, which we may not get before Jesus returns,
Okay.
but in Malachi, they do worship the bronze pole with the serpent on it, because what happened there? The serpent. This is like the worst story in the Bible, and one of the worst in my mind, because I know Chuck likes snakes. I don't like snakes. And if I was in a valley and all of these like really poison, like thousands and millions of snakes show up, and people are dying left and right, and they say, just look up at Moses' staff and you'll live. That even though I lived, I would be traumatized for the rest of my life, right? But what they did, because that happened, is they worshiped the staff. It became an idol. And they no longer worship the God who made the staff powerful. They worship the staff itself. And it's the same thing with the rod. Like if you worship the rod, if you worship the man, you worship the wrong thing. If you worship the staff, you worship the wrong thing. You need to worship the God who is doing the thing with the man and the staff. Right? That's the whole Bible. It's like you keep worshiping an idol, like idolatry is really at the core of all of our issues. We make an idol out of something, everything but God is kind of our idol worship. And it was interesting. I've been doing this study on New Testament. The one thing Paul is really good at is calling out people's idols. He would find their idols, whether it was the Jews and their idolatry of the law. So you can idolize good things and you can idolize bad things, but all of it's idolatry, and it keeps you from God. Like you can make your family an idol. You can make your job an idol. You can make sports an idol. Literally everything in the universe can be made an idol. And the point is, if it's an idol, then God is not on the throne of your heart. He's not the one you're worshiping. And so here they would have made an idol out of the staff if they thought the staff was the power. But the power is the Lord's. And the Lord can do what? He can win a battle that doesn't seem like it should be won. This was a sneak attack. This was a, they were just dying of thirst. Are they ready to go to war? They just came from Egypt. Did they have soldiers trained and equipped, ready for battle? Did the Egyptians let them build armies?
No.
Right? These are things sometimes I think you got to dive deep and be like, these are a bunch of farmers and fishermen, and this is a bunch of bricklayers. I mean, they're all masons. Why? Because they built the temple, they built all the Sphinx and whatever, right? They didn't have karate classes and MMA schools or how to shoot a bow and arrow or whatever, a spear. They were like, and so for them to win this battle against a trained, equipped army could only have been given credit to God. But this group of people, the Amalekites, they do represent a godlessness that will pursue all of us.
What was their descendants?
So yeah, so there is, some say Cain, like there's a lot of different views on that. But what I do want to, you're on the right track, but the other direction. So what ends up happening, because Saul doesn't wipe them all out, Samuel has to kill the king in front of everybody, which is disgraceful for the prophet to do. And then his ancestors becomes a man named Haman. You've heard of Haman?
Yeah.
Haman is the one that is with the king, and he says, these Jews, we need to get rid of them. How about you come up with a date when you'll take out all the Jews in the whole world? And so Haman gets that, but it just happens for such a time as this. There was a woman named Esther who the king falls in love with, in a sense, and she says, Haman is, he's been trying to kill all my people. And so, that pole he built for Mordecai that he wanted to crucify him on, the king says, no, that's where Haman goes. Haman is the descendant. He's the godless one who hates the Jews. Have you ever stopped and watched the news and be like, why do these rich kids at these schools that cost $70,000 hate Israel so much? Like, what could possibly lead them to this kind of view? Because it's not a logical problem. It's a demonic, unseen spiritual issue, and none of them can tell you logically why this matters more than any other war. Like, there are wars all over the planet right now. There's, you go in Africa, there's all kinds of like corruption and horrible things happening. Why do we not care? Why are we not like sitting wanting the whatever Hutus not to be, the Tutsis not to be able to have the Hutus, right? Yeah, because this is bigger than just, this is eternal. This is the spiritual war. This is a battle that's waging on the other side where we can't see, but we do see the effect, right? We see how it plays over. So here, Haman represented. A lot of people think like Haman's descendants is Hitler. Like there's a sense of, there's a certain level of demonic activity within a person that hates the Jews so much. Hey, right in that building right over there. Yep, no problem. So that was, it's interesting to study this lineage. It does go back. Some people, you could say Ham or whatever, but we don't know. But we do know later it does say Haman is a descendant of the king that Samuel kills, right? Who Saul was told to kill, but he brought back as kind of this prize to the Lord. And this is where full obedience. So he says, I don't desire sacrifice. I desire obedience, right? He tells Saul, I didn't want you to give me a sacrifice. I just wanted you to do what I told you. Why did he tell him that? Because God knows exactly all the lineage. He knows what's going to happen. He knows exactly all the details. And if you trust him enough to say, I don't need you. So it's this whole part. I don't need you to do more than the cross. I don't need you to do more than what I'm going to do for you. I just need you to listen to me and allow me to do what I'm going to do in your life. All right. Gina, we got the last 14 through 16, right?
Then the Lord said to Moses, write this as a reminder in a book and recite it in the hearing of Joshua. I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from heaven. And Moses built an altar and called it, the Lord is my banner. He said, a hand upon the banner of the Lord. The Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation.
Yeah. So this becomes an ongoing issue throughout all the way to Haman. So God is consistent in his taking care of his people, but he calls us to obedience, right? I mean, faith is obedience. If I believe, if I have faith, I'm going to obey what he tells me to do. So, all right, what stuck out to you the most from this chapter? Yeah. So week to week, I'm always like, well, these are really interesting accounts that I don't remember too much hearing about. People don't discuss these things, right? You don't hear much about these things anymore anywhere, but they're so unique. This isn't like, if you talk to most people, say, tell me about the Bible. They'll say it's a book of rules, regulations, how to be nice. It is a behavior modification book, right? With some nice stories about some guy who got swallowed by a whale and, a few other things. People don't know the depth of this is there's so many interesting, unique accounts that took place. And it takes faith because none of this is logical. It's all spiritual. And if you read it with a logical perspective, you're not going to believe any of it. If you go, and when I mean logic, I mean the flesh. If you read the Bible through flesh covered eyes, you're not going to see, it's none of this. There's no way you're going to accept any of it. But if you can accept that God created and Jesus rose from the grave, you can accept everything else because he reveals it to you and the Holy Spirit guides you and gives you confidence in it. And you begin to see how clear it is that even today on the news, you can't get away from the same problem, the hating of the Jews. Yes. Yep. All right. Any final thoughts before we finish up? I'd encourage you, take things with you, write them down, apply them to your life. These are the stories where you look back, they celebrate these things. God producing water from the rock. That's a family story. That's a part of our tradition, celebrate that. Are you committed to God as much as he's committed to you? That's a question to consider every day and to look to him for guidance and everything, right? And so,
when the rock was crucified and he speared it,
yeah. And what came out?
blood and water.
Yeah. When the water divided from the blood, they knew he was dead. How many, it's just unending. The Old Testament is a mystery concealed. There's no way they could have understood all these things. They were so random and what is going on? And they had to wait 2,000 years for the mystery to be revealed. And so they got to live it, but we have the book that reveals all these things that happened. How blessed are we? How fortunate are we? That we're able to study this. So, all right. So we are, to whom much is given, much is required. And so we are called to live this out and to share this and to be faithful with what we've been entrusted with. All right. Is there someone who'd like to close us in prayer tonight? Have a volunteer? All right, Bill. Thank you, sir.
Our Heavenly Father, we just thank you for the group that we have here tonight. What a blessing it is to delve in your word, Lord, and realize how much the Old Testament is connected to the New Testament and vice versa, Lord. And we just thank you for this, finding this out, Father. And Lord, we just praise your name today, Father. And Lord, we need to tell others, Father, and continue to bring more into our family, Lord. And we just thank you tonight.